Did you know that in China, there are more surveillance cameras than people? With over 200 million cameras watching every move, China has become the most monitored country in the world. Meanwhile, in America, the rule of law is often seen as a shield protecting individual rights, but it's far from perfect. In 2020, 58% of Americans questioned whether their legal system was truly fair. So, what happens when two of the world's most powerful nations use the law in such different ways? In this video, we'll dive deep into the rule of law in China and the US, comparing how both nations approach justice, freedom, and control. From China's party-led system to America's independent courts, the differences are staggering. Stay tuned as we explore how the law plays a huge role in shaping not just these countries, but the future of global politics. Don't miss the shocking truths that might change how you see the world's most powerful legal systems. Chapter 1, The Law That Binds, the foundation of governance. When we talk about the rule of law, it's not just about laws, it's about how they function and who controls them. In China, the rule of law isn't solely about the law itself. It's tightly linked to the Communist Party's power. The country's legal framework operates under a socialist rule of law system. The idea is that law serves the people, but it also serves the party's interests. This is where it differs sharply from Western systems. In America, the rule of law is built on the Constitution. It's a document designed to limit government power and protect individual freedoms. Interestingly, despite China's heavy control, its legal system has grown in sophistication. As of 2021, there were more than 300,000 legal professionals in China. This suggests that, on paper, the country has a robust legal system. Yet, when it comes to independence, China's judges are not free to make decisions without party interference. In contrast, US courts are intended to be independent. The judicial system in America is based on the separation of powers, ensuring that the courts can challenge laws and government actions. The Constitution was created in 1787, after decades of political struggle. In the US, the Constitution is not just a set of rules but the backbone of democracy. Every law, from the smallest traffic regulation to major policies, is ultimately judged by how it aligns with the Constitution. Meanwhile, in China, the party has the final say on constitutional interpretation. This centralization can create friction with the idea of a truly independent legal system. The differences don't end at the foundational level. China's political structure gives the Communist Party a unique position in lawmaking and law enforcement. Party leaders regularly intervene in legal proceedings, which can affect the fairness of trials. In contrast, American politicians don't have direct control over court rulings, although political influence is still a factor, especially in high-profile cases. Chapter 2, From Courts to Control, the role of judiciary in shaping power. One of the most striking differences between China and the US is the role of the judiciary. In China, courts are part of the Communist Party's apparatus. Judges do not enjoy the same independence as those in the US. According to a 2017 report, about 90% of Chinese judges are members of the Communist Party. This means that, in practice, judges follow the party's directives. Even though the Chinese legal system is vast, with hundreds of thousands of lawyers and judges, it's ultimately the party that controls the narrative of justice. In America, the judicial system was designed to be a check on the power of the other branches of government. The US Constitution created a strong separation of powers to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. For example, Supreme Court justices serve life terms, which helps them remain unbiased, or at least insulated from political pressure. This was evident in landmark cases like Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, where the court ruled against segregation despite political opposition. Yet, it's not perfect. The nomination process for US Supreme Court justices is highly political. In recent years, we've seen how political polarization impacts the process. A 2020 study found that 75% of Americans felt that Supreme Court nominations had become more partisan. This reveals that even in an independent system, politics can still play a significant role. Moreover, China's system places a strong emphasis on the rule of man rather than the rule of law. In this context, party leaders hold more power than the law itself. Chinese President Xi Jinping has emphasized the importance of the party leading all areas of Chinese life, including the legal system. His famous quote, "The party rules everything," speaks volumes about the structure of Chinese governance. On the other hand, the US has seen the power of an independent judiciary protect citizens' rights. Take, for instance, the 2015 Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage nationwide in Obergefell v. Hodges. The court's decision was based on constitutional principles, despite strong opposition from some political groups. This shows the strength of the US judiciary in standing against popular or political pressure. Chapter 3: The Party's Puppet Master versus the People's Power. What's the true relationship between the law and the government? In China, the party holds the ultimate authority. All laws, regulations, and even constitutional amendments are interpreted through the lens of the Communist Party's priorities. This centralization of power is why some call China's legal system law by decree. Party leaders, particularly President Xi, have shown no hesitation in using the law as a political tool. In the US, however, the power ultimately lies with the people. The concept of popular sovereignty is key. This means that the people give the government the authority to rule through democratic elections. A 2020 Pew Research study found that 58% of Americans believe the country's legal system is a fair one. This suggests that, at least in principle, American citizens have trust in a system that aims to protect individual rights. Yet, it's not always so clear-cut. While the US legal system is designed to empower individuals, laws can be influenced by political ideologies. In the 2020 presidential election, for example, legal challenges to voting rules and results were a central issue. This shows that even in America, the relationship between the law and government is not always straightforward. In China, legal reforms have been pushed forward with the party's agenda in mind. For instance, the 2014 anti-corruption campaign, led by President Xi, used the legal system to target political rivals. The rule of law in China became a tool for consolidating power rather than ensuring fairness. Despite this, there's been progress in areas like intellectual property rights, as China aims to improve its image on the world stage. The US is not immune to using the law as a political tool either. For example, in 2017, the Trump administration used executive orders to restrict immigration from several countries. While framed as a national security measure, it was criticized as a political decision that circumvented democratic processes. This shows that while the US legal system is designed for checks and balances, those checks are not always fully effective when faced with political pressure. Ultimately, both countries face challenges in maintaining the balance between law, power, and fairness. While China centralizes power under the Communist Party, the US relies on a complex system of checks and balances. Both systems strive to maintain order, but they do so in ways that reflect their unique political histories. Understanding these strategies provides a deeper insight into the rule of law in each nation. Chapter 4: Rights Under Fire. Civil liberties. In the legal arena, civil liberties are at the heart of any legal system, but the way they're treated in China and the US couldn't be more different. In the US, the Constitution guarantees individual rights, from freedom of speech to the right to a fair trial. These rights are woven into the fabric of American law. Yet, even in the US, there are debates over where the line should be drawn, especially when security is at stake. For example, in 2020, during the pandemic, the US saw a sharp rise in government surveillance. The public debated whether measures like contact tracing violated privacy rights, showing how fragile even fundamental freedoms can be. In China, civil liberties often take a backseat to state control. The Chinese government has frequently used laws to suppress freedom of expression. The 2019 Hong Kong protests were a stark reminder of how China limits political freedoms. The government cracked down hard, using both legal and extrajudicial methods to stifle dissent. At the same time, China has increased efforts to control its citizens online. According to a 2020 Freedom House report, China has the largest censorship operation in the world, with over 1 million workers engaged in monitoring and controlling internet content. China's legal system allows for broad interpretations of national security, often to the detriment of civil liberties. In 2015, the Chinese government passed a controversial anti-terrorism law that enabled the state to expand surveillance measures under the guise of protecting citizens. This law, which includes broad definitions of terrorism, has been used to justify arrests and crackdowns, particularly in regions like Xinjiang. Critics argue that these measures target specific ethnic groups under the guise of national security. The US, on the other hand, is deeply committed to its Bill of Rights. These rights are enshrined in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and they cannot easily be altered. However, the US also faces challenges. In 2020, amid protests for racial justice, many criticized the government's heavy-handed tactics in policing demonstrations. The use of military-style tactics, such as tear gas and rubber bullets, sparked public outcry over whether the state was overreaching. It's clear that in both countries, the balance between national security and civil liberties is a delicate one. While the US has strong constitutional protections, those rights are tested in times of crisis. China's system, however, is designed to limit liberties in the name of order and stability. The legal systems in both nations offer valuable lessons in how law interacts with individual freedoms, and how governments use law to maintain control. Chapter 5: Enforcement or Oppression. Policing. The rule of law. Policing is where the rubber meets the road for the rule of law. In the US, law enforcement is decentralized, with local, state, and federal agencies each having their jurisdiction. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, there are more than 18,000 police agencies across the country, creating a patchwork system. This fragmentation can result in uneven enforcement of laws. Some argue that this decentralization makes it harder to maintain consistent standards, as seen in high-profile cases of police misconduct. In contrast, China has a more centralized approach to law enforcement. The Ministry of Public Security controls the country's police forces, and local officials are expected to follow national guidelines. This structure allows China to impose strict policies across the entire country. The Chinese government has also invested heavily in surveillance technology. According to a 2021 report by the New York Times, China has installed an estimated 200 million surveillance cameras, making it the most monitored country in the world. This vast network helps the government keep a tight grip on its citizens. The question arises, is this surveillance an example of effective law enforcement, or is it oppression? In China, the government argues that its surveillance network helps prevent crime and maintain order. Yet, critics say it is used to stifle dissent, especially among ethnic minorities in regions like Xinjiang. The Chinese government has used its surveillance network to monitor Uyghur Muslims, with reports of forced labor camps and arbitrary detentions. In the US, while surveillance is also growing, it is often met with public pushback. The National Security Agency, NSA, mass data collection programs, revealed by Edward Snowden in 2013, sparked debates about the balance between security and privacy. While these surveillance programs were defended on national security grounds, they raised concerns about government overreach. Public opinion shifted, with 54% of Americans, according to a 2020 Gallup poll, saying they were concerned about government surveillance. Both countries' policing strategies raise important questions about what it means to protect the public. China's approach is top-down, focusing on control and prevention, while the US system is more fragmented, often resulting in varying degrees of accountability. The challenge for both nations is finding a way to balance security with individual freedoms while maintaining public trust in the legal system. Chapter 6: The Global Stage, Exporting Law and Justice. Both China and the US are global powers, and their legal systems have an impact beyond their borders. The US has long been a proponent of spreading democracy and the rule of law worldwide. One example of this is the US government's promotion of human rights through foreign aid. In 2020, the US spent over $20 billion on international development, much of which was aimed at strengthening rule of law systems in developing countries. The US emphasizes the importance of independent courts, free speech, and free elections in its foreign policy. China, however, has adopted a different approach. Rather than promoting democracy, China's legal exports are often tied to its economic interests. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, China has been offering loans to developing countries with an emphasis on infrastructure. In return, China often encourages these countries to adopt legal frameworks similar to its own. This includes tighter control over media, limited political freedoms, and the strengthening of state power. A 2021 report by the Carnegie Endowment noted that over 140 countries have signed agreements with China under the BRI, many of which include legal reforms that align with Chinese policies. This exportation of legal norms raises questions about the future of global governance. The US has tried to position itself as a champion of human rights and democratic values, but in recent years, its own legal system has faced criticism. For example, the US has been accused of violating international human rights standards through practices like the detention of immigrants in camps at the southern border. This inconsistency between American ideals and actions has led some to question whether the US can truly be a model for the rule of law abroad. China, meanwhile, has been gaining influence by providing an alternative model. While it doesn't promote democracy, it offers stability and economic growth through its legal system. Countries that align with China often benefit from infrastructure development and financial support. However, this comes at the cost of political freedoms and individual rights. As China's global reach expands, its legal system may become a more significant force in shaping international norms. In the end, both countries are trying to shape the world in their image. The US pushes for individual rights and democratic principles, while China promotes state control and stability. How these two competing visions of the rule of law play out will have lasting impacts on global governance in the 21st century. If you're enjoying this comparison between China and the US, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated with more in-depth discussions on politics, law, and global power.